very diverse country of populations. And then why we study the caboclo and people at here at the University of Federal University of Prague, but also colleagues of mine in Indiana University, Columbia University in New York, have been studying for the last 20, 30 years. There was historically here many colonization of Brazil. You had large Portuguese holders and the Jesuit networks that had used diverse patterns and use of labor of both the slaves for production of things like sugarcane, and you had also the indigenous labor for the in networks of the Jesuits. And so over time, you have the caboclo as a miscegenation of the Africans, the indigenous, and the Portuguese. Over time, in the last decades, the caboclo is the population that has taken over and dominates, and is highly densely populated here in the estuary. And unfortunately, very interesting and important because they are very intensely using managing the floodplain forest at the water forest interface. But in the context of Brazil, they're often invisible. You don't mainly capture them under the radar, what they're doing. They're in the informal economy. How they're using natural resources is fairly visible. And how, and since they're now the a dominant population, and also you're in the scene, I think there's many vulnerabilities that they have. And so the last few decades have been dedicated to understanding better the local population. So this project is
I forgot to tell you something. As we are not going to have too much time after these panel presentations for questions and answers, then I will please encourage you to take any notes and write any questions that you have of any nature related to the presentations. And we will collect those at the end of the sessions, and then we will use those questions tomorrow morning to basically open and guide our debates tomorrow. So questions are very important. Please, anything that you find that you want to clarify that is something that you would like we can discuss tomorrow in the working group, please do write so, and then we'll collect.
Okay, thank you. Some information that wasn't in the presentation this morning about our project. Again, this is a collaborative research between socio-cultural adaptation of local communities to extreme-tidal events. It involves Federal University here in Pará, Columbia University, University of Indiana, University of Waterloo, Canada. Oriana is our fearless leader, who also put together a nice workshop. Just a brief overview. We have these three components of our project that is focused on building the resilience of those socio-ecological systems. Complex impacts of climate change and the local climate variability across the estuary. The first part here is what was presented to you this morning to report and analyze change in land boundaries, and also those complex factors that are affecting that tidal variability that's important specifically to the livelihoods of the local. Then we have another component that is underway that we will investigate more specifically at the local level, the socio-ecological processes of adaptation, their livelihood, diversity, and process of adapting their systems to these extreme changes. So we anticipate that the final, then, some of that information that we gather will go into this agent-based model, which Peter is going to present here. And then the strategies for adaptation, how do households respond to disturbances on complex socio-ecological environments, understanding the drivers of change, the effectiveness of household community strategies, outcomes of community resilience. Just an example of some of the ethnographies that we're doing and some results in a paper recently submitted to ecology is one of the factors that builds their resilience is their maintenance of a mosaic landscape of highly diverse land uses with a high level of knowledge of local microecologies where they can in short order and both long-term gradual changes and fairly short order can change their land use production system between seasons. Here's an example of one thing that's part of the Varzea, where he has a type of agriculture of perennial monocrops, but he can very quickly change the varieties. They're not necessarily lost, although we don't see them if they change to agroforestry and forestry systems more adapted to high flooding. But this is an example where he can plant where he had the bananas in the floodplain, the big weak clay, takes it up to the higher area less flooded, but uses, you can hardly see it here, but he uses the foliage of some of the acai fruit as well in the areas more flooded more frequently, as to increase the humidity of the soils in the higher elevation of the floodplain. Or here you can see him moving what was once managed intensively there, he can move it to the levee at the edge of the river. So these are some of the dynamic processes they use to adapt to some of the changes that are underway, the gradual changes underway. So here's an example of extreme events that are more unpredictable in this uncertain environment. But just an example in this community, an example of the bahia here that you can see in front of as you arrived by the airport in Belém. So when they have particularly strong floods or winds, and it's very difficult to fish for shrimp, for example. But you walk across the community and inside of the forest on the same landscape, they can manage. This is actually a rubber tree still managed on the landscape from that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the rubber tree, which is also good for maintaining the wells inside the streams, inside the forest. And so as you see, this is taken at the same time, just crossing the landscape. And here the calm waters, and they can actually put fish and shrimp here in these types of conditions. This is going in now. I'm going to talk a little bit about Sergio's slides. So Sergio, I'm going to state something because we know. He put together the Vogt social resilience system. We'll see kind of the stakeholders around their communities. So we have the community. We have here the different levels of governments, and also amateurs, who gives them more information of production, like the extension agency. Local institutes providing the weather information here. Here he has some of the factors that also affect the resilience of their land use system. Some of the important things we'll talk about here is we have the social policies as their cash transfers and other benefits from the government are very important in their decision making for production, and other academic actors as ourselves, bringing information about the system. Just a brief summary of some of the socioeconomic studies that he has conducted, just to show here that the salary distribution, he did a study separating by upland communities and floodplain communities. So this is the distribution of income class in the upland community of both of them. So salaries, interestingly enough, are the highest source of income versus household production or agriculture, and the second is the very important government cash transfers. To talk more about. Now when we go to the caboclo population that's living in the floodplains, you see that even the government cash transfers and benefits are even more important. So this is something besides that has reduced very much their dependency and interaction with the environment, and something where this project is also going to explore the impacts of these on their livelihoods and their results. And now I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nathan. I just want to talk about another dimension of this project, which we are now moving into, and that is the development of a model, and I'll talk about that more in just a minute. The idea here is to use this technology, this or this modeling approach to understand more about adaptation and then resilience in these communities. And Nathan's already described some of the work that's been done in the field, talking with these local people to understand more about the strategies that they pursue as it relates to the mosaic or the combination of land use and other activities that they pursue in a dynamic and complex environment. And so they're facing changes from an economic perspective, changes in prices, for example, for SIE, but also complex changes from a biophysical point of view. And so they have to be constantly prepared to adapt to these changes. And Nathan's work has been looking at some of the strategies that they pursue to do that, in particular the complex mosaic of land uses that they maintain. Where we're moving with that then is to take that into the next step, which is the development of to try and develop a model or an agent-based model based on some of the work that we've been doing. And in this particular case, you're all familiar with modeling, of course, because you have an interest in climate change. You're familiar with general circulation models and global models of climate change. What we're doing then is taking the modeling effort into the human dimension and the human side of this equation, looking at developing models at a local level which try to capture the decision-making of local households as they respond to these many dynamic changes. And we use agent-based models to do that. Agent-based modeling has a history of about 15 years or so in the research community, and it's been applied to many, many different fields of research, everything from physics, where the agents represent individual molecules, right through to anthropology and social science, where we use agents to represent human decision-making or households, in this case. And we do that by creating a model in which we populate with a collection of agents, where each agent represents an individual household. And those households then are faced with making decisions in response to the environment, both the social environment of the other agents, as well as the biophysical environment that is represented in the model. The idea then, if we can capture some of that decision making, is that it gives us a tool to run different scenarios or explore different scenarios relating to adaptation strategies to outcomes. That's the idea. Just to describe in a little bit more detail what an agent-based model is, you can think of these agents as being autonomous or self-contained entities within the model. So they're represented as individual objects within this model. And for each one of these, you populate the agent with its own characteristics. In this particular case, the agents represent a household. So each agent represents an individual household, and each household can have its own characteristics about the number of children in the household, the total population of the household, the labor that's available to carry out activities on the farm, the capital that is available to the household to carry out these activities, and any other resources that the household may have. And one of the new things that we're adding, or the new dimensions that we're adding to this particular model, is that these households are multi-sited, which means that members of the household may live both on the farm or in a local community or a local city, and there are important interactions between the members of the household in these different locations, which are important to the overall decisions of the household and the livelihood of that household. So we have this collection of these individual household agents, and they can interact with other agents in the simulation or other households, but also interact with the biophysical environment. And you can represent the biophysical environment as a series of layers, if you're familiar with GIS technology and raster or cell-space layers. You can represent your physical environment as a series of these layers, and the agents can interact with those. Layers might include things like land use, or soil quality, or whatever other factors are important to your particular model. And so as the model runs, these agents go through a cycle where they make some decisions about how they're going to allocate their resources. So they'll use a production function to determine how to allocate their resources to different activities, so they make decisions about how much of different activities to pursue, and that may include farming SIE, farming other crops, or pursuing activities in the local city. So again, the household as a whole is making decisions about who's doing what and how much they're doing. We allow those decisions to be made, we let the time run in the simulation, and those decisions lead to outcomes, whether it's the growth of a particular crop on their farm, or the remittance of funds that have been earned in the local city. All of these things feed into sort of a harvesting of the revenue at the end of the cycle, which contributes again to the household, an updating of the household characteristics, and we go back to the top again and start over. Typically, these models run on an annual cycle. We're currently in the process of constructing the individual elements or pieces of this model, and Sergio's been working on some of the economic aspects of the model, developing a production function. We're also working on the development of the agent itself and the testing of those different pieces, and that's starting to come together now. And some of the interesting methodological challenges that we're facing relate to testing disparate decision-making methods. So we have a model conceptually designed where, again, the household itself, the household agent, will make a series of decisions or pursue a variety of different strategies regarding the adaptation to the information that's collected. That results in sort of some mix of different activities, whether it's fishing activity or farming activities or living in the local city, and that feeds into a variety of biophysical or other external processes in the model, such as alterations to the biophysical environment or changes in the market, the local markets and market prices, and then again that feeds back into the agent. One of the challenges we face, of course, relates to translating the decision-making in a household into some kind of computer model, some kind of computer code. The question is how to do that. Economists have different approaches to understanding human decision-making and human behavior in an economic environment, whether it's sort of a maximizing behavior that people pursue or satisfy some type of behavior. Any of those can be encoded in a variety of different ways in these agents and in their decision-making. So we have to make some decisions about how to do that, and we've been doing some work to try and understand the differences that result from pursuing different decision-making algorithms for these models. So we have to understand how our own decisions about, from an economic point of view, about how these agents behave, how that affects the behavior of the model. And we're learning something about that and how different strategies can result in very different outcomes as far as the behavior of these agents. And these are just a couple of examples comparing decision trees and linear programming, which are two common methods used for creating agent decision-making algorithms. Can lead to very different outcomes when it comes to looking at sort of collective land use trajectories. Another example. So what we're looking at doing is actually creating an ensemble of these models to, much like you might do with ensemble modeling in related to climate change. We're looking at creating ensembles of these models to incorporate some of the different assumptions that we make about human decision-making. And that's something that's quite new to agent-based modeling, particularly as it relates to land use change. I had the good fortune to participate in a workshop in London about a month ago, the Thames Lead Working Group, which is very interested in ensemble modeling. And so I hope that this work will dovetail with the work that they're doing there, and that represents sort of quite a new field for this type of work. And then some of the other issues that we'll face as we go along are sort of the validation of these models and understanding the output as it compares to the data that's been collected in the field. Some of the expected results or analysis that we can undertake with a model like this. Looking at different indicators of livelihood, such as labor, income, and the percentage of income earned from different activities, and understanding more about how those different mixes of activities lead to outcomes in these communities. Looking at different scenarios, so trying to explore the effect of boom and bust cycles in terms of prices. And there is a history of boom and bust cycles throughout this region. Looking at landscape responses to the activities of these households. And how these households respond to changes in larger global indicators, whether those are economic or physical. Why model? Why do this? Because the experiments allow us to undertake a whole series of kind of what-if scenarios, and that can inform policy making. So what if we adapt a particular policy, and how does that interact with some of the decision making that happens at the local level? So the intent there is to try and understand how the system might respond to different policies or different perturbations in some of the input variables. The simple construction of the model of it itself forces us to consider some of these many actions and interactions within the community. That itself is very instructive. The experiments are repeatable and non-destructive, so we can try out a variety of different policy scenarios in this sort of cyber lab, and then hopefully learn something about the potential impacts or outcomes associated with that. And a variety of different variables can be integrated into the model, not only numerical data or information, but also some of the information related to strategies and human interactions. And that's it.
Thank you, Peter. That was very interesting presentation.